Morgan Carter settled into her seat in first class with the quiet confidence of someone who had fought tooth and nail to claim every inch of her success. She was no stranger to luxury, nor the subtle, scrutinizing glances that often followed her, an unmistakable presence of power cloaked in elegance. Tonight, she had ordered her usual, a rich lobster bisque to start, followed by a perfectly cooked prime steak paired with vintage Chateau Margaux, a ritual that affirmed her place among the elite on every international flight. But as the flight attendant returned, wearing a strained smile that barely masked indifference, Morgan's world shifted. "We're out of your meal," the attendant said flatly, offering instead a cold chicken sandwich and a glass of water. The chill in that moment wasn't from the airplane's air conditioning. It was the cold weight of a deliberate dismissal. Around her, other passengers savored caviar and champagne, their laughter floating through the cabin like a cruel reminder of what she was denied. Morgan was the only black woman in the first class cabin, acutely aware of the invisible line drawn sharply between her and the rest. This wasn't a simple mix up or a shortage of food. It was an orchestrated slight, an unspoken message wrapped in polite service and feigned smiles. The cold sandwich wasn't just a meal, it was a symbol of exclusion, a stark declaration that despite her achievements, despite her status, she was still seen as an outsider. But Morgan Carter had long learned to read between the lines, to recognize the familiar contours of prejudice dressed as oversight. This moment wasn't about hunger. It was about respect, something she refused to let slip away quietly. And in that seat, under the soft golden lights of first class, a quiet storm began to rise within her. One that would shake more than just this flight and force an entire industry to confront the shadows it had long ignored. Morgan Carter boarded Stratus Air Flight 917 with an aura that commanded the room without a single word. Tall and poised, her perfectly tailored navy suit hugged her silhouette like armor, a symbol of the battles she had won and the ones yet to come. Her sleek black leather shoes clicked softly against the polished floor, each step measured and deliberate. Her hair, naturally curly, was pulled back into a neat bun that framed a face honed by years of relentless ambition and steely resolve. As the founder and CEO of Morgan Tech, a titan in artificial intelligence and data security, Morgan's name had become synonymous with innovation and power. Forbes had recognized her as one of the world's most influential women for 3 years running, yet none of that glitter defined her. Her strength came from a deeper place, forged in adversity. This flight was more than a journey. It was a pivotal step toward sealing a multi-billion-dollar deal in Geneva, a deal that would extend her company's influence across Europe and mark a historic moment as the rise of black women leaders reshaping the tech world. Settling into seat 1A, the coveted pinnacle of the cabin, Morgan felt the weight of history and expectation. The plush leather seat embraced her, its luxury a silent testament to how far she had climbed. But the summit was not handed to her on a silver platter. It was earned through years of overcoming invisible barriers, through perseverance in rooms where she was often the only woman of color. Around her, the soft hum of the first class lounge faded into background noise. She opened her tablet, fingers gliding over the screen that held the merger contract, a carefully crafted plan she had nurtured for over 2 years. Every detail, every clause was a weapon in the high stakes battle for global tech supremacy. Morgan didn't need to prove her worth. She was the embodiment of it. Yet, beneath her calm exterior, a fire burned quietly. This wasn't just business, it was a declaration. In this cabin dominated by white suits and condescending smiles, Morgan Carter was here not only to succeed, but to claim a space that had too long been denied. As Morgan carefully placed her Hermes handbag into the overhead compartment, a flight attendant approached with a nod. Polite, yet his eyes barely acknowledged her presence before flicking toward a white male passenger who had just appeared behind her. It was a glance so automatic, so dismissive. It felt like an invisible barrier had been drawn between them. Morgan smiled softly, saying nothing, for she had long grown accustomed to this peculiar invisibility cloak the world seemed to drape over her. It wasn't the first time she had been reduced to a shadow in a room full of privilege, nor would it be the last. Her seat, 1A, was the throne of first class, the seat with the best view and the loudest silence. Around her, the world gleamed with quiet luxury. Crystal glasses sparkling, leather seats stitched with precision, and the low murmur of conversation between those born into privilege. But Morgan's summit was not a place freely given. It was a mountain she'd clawed her way up, rung by relentless rung, fueled by sheer grit and unwavering will. As she settled in, opening her tablet to review the merger contract that would redefine her company's future, footsteps echoed softly behind her, deliberate and sharp. A female voice pierced the quiet. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Becky, and I'll be serving you during this flight." Becky Whitmore, blonde hair pulled back tightly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and a gaze that scanned Morgan with thinly veiled judgment. There was an edge to Becky's politeness, a coldness hidden beneath the veneer of service. Morgan met her eyes steadily, calm but firm, signaling that she would not be underestimated or ignored. The room buzzed softly as another attendant greeted white passengers by name with practiced warmth and deference. Laughter rose lightly over the clink of glasses, yet Morgan remained an island of quiet resolve. Here, in the heart of first class, the invisible lines of belonging were drawn sharply, and Morgan knew that today, those lines were about to be challenged like never before. Becky Whitmore moved through the cabin with practiced ease, her blonde hair neatly tied at the nape, her smile polished but carefully crafted to mask the simmering indifference beneath. When she stopped beside seat 1A, the tray she carried was barely covered, exposing the cold chicken sandwich and a half-filled glass of water meant for Morgan Carter. The only premium meal left, and certainly not one befitting a CEO of Morgan Tech. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we've run out of premium meals," Becky said, her voice flat and void of any apology or regret. Morgan's eyes narrowed, and she turned fully to face the attendant. "I pre-ordered last week," she replied softly, but with an unmistakable firmness that brooked no argument. "I have email confirmations, booking references, reminders from Stratus Air." Becky shrugged, the small notepad in her hand fluttering like an afterthought. Maybe the system wasn't updated. What, she muttered before turning away, not daring to glance back. Around them, the luxury of first class carried on unbothered. The gentle murmur of conversations, the soft glow of wine glasses catching the ambient light, all indifferent to the quiet injustice unfolding in 1A. Morgan's senses sharpened, every detail, the dismissive shrug, the cold sandwich, the silence of the bystanders, etched itself into memory. She wasn't hungry. She was absorbing the weight of rejection, the subtle but unmistakable message that despite her stature, she was being pushed to the margins. Behind her, white men in tailored suits sipped champagne and debated markets, unaware or unconcerned that the woman among them was being sidelined, ignored by a system designed to elevate only those it deemed worthy. This moment wasn't about a meal. It was a mirror reflecting a deeper prejudice, a quiet exclusion cloaked in polite service. But Morgan Carter was no stranger to being underestimated. With steady hands clasped on her knees, she sat tall, not out of pride, but because she knew this affront was a battle call, a summons to confront not just the cold sandwich, but the cold realities of systemic bias embedded in the gilded halls of power. Morgan Carter sat still, the cold chicken sandwich untouched before her, not from pride, but to fully absorb the sting of the insult. The quiet hum of the first-class cabin seemed to fade into a heavy silence, isolating her in a bubble of sharp awareness. She noticed every detail. The precise way Becky Whitmore's back remained rigid as she walked away, the confident strides that spoke not of a mistake, but of willful disregard. It wasn't an accident. It was the calculated indifference of someone convinced Morgan wouldn't challenge her, someone who saw her not as a valued passenger, but as an inconvenience to be brushed aside. Around her, the cabin continued its rituals of luxury. Glasses clinked softly, whispered conversations fluttered like silk, and laughter floated across aisles, all underscoring a divide that was more than physical. Morgan's gaze swept the room, landing on the white men seated behind her. Comfortably sipping champagne, discussing stock markets and digital currencies. Not a single one looked her way. Not one asked if she needed anything. No voice broke the silence that shrouded her. This was the unspoken message of exclusion. Being present yet invisible, acknowledged but unacknowledged. She recalled moments from her past, The countless boardrooms where she had entered as the only black woman, the dismissive glances, the whispered doubts about her capabilities. This was a familiar battle, fought not with shouts but with quiet resilience. Morgan's fingers lightly tapped the armrest, a steady rhythm echoing the pulse of determination building within. She would not allow this moment to be forgotten or dismissed. This cold sandwich was a symbol, a challenge to be met head on. And she was ready. In the heart of luxury, surrounded by privilege, Morgan Carter was preparing to ignite a storm that would shatter the veneer of polite discrimination and demand the respect she had long earned. Morgan's mind raced beneath a calm, composed exterior, a quiet storm building with every passing second. The cabin lights cast a soft glow, but inside her, a fire was igniting. A fire fueled not by anger, but by the deep fatigue of having to constantly prove her worth in spaces that never seemed built for her. This wasn't the first time she had faced this invisible barrier. The cold sandwich was just the latest reminder of a world that still struggled to accept her rightful place. She remembered vividly the countless boardrooms where she was the only black woman, where her ideas were questioned before they were heard, where polite smiles masked underlying doubts. Yet, she had never let those moments break her spirit. Instead, they had forged her into the relentless leader she was today. Now, seated in 1A, the pinnacle of the world she had climbed, Morgan knew that silence was no longer an option. The luxury around her, the whispered conversations and clinking glasses, all felt like a stage set for exclusion. But beneath that veneer, a revolution was stirring. With a steady breath, she reached for her phone and opened the Morgan Tech Internal Security Management app, a powerful tool she and her team had designed to analyze patterns of bias and behavior in real time. Her fingers flew over the screen, pulling up the flight attendant's profile. Rebecca Whitmore, senior cabin crew, with a troubling record of passenger complaints about service discrimination. Internal emails surfaced, revealing a pattern of favoritism and dismissive attitudes toward passengers who didn't fit the expected mold. Morgan saved the data, encrypted it, and sent a precise message to her executive assistant, Aaliyah Grant. Activate emergency audit protocol. Flight 917, crew ID STA9035. Each word was deliberate, sharp, an unyielding command to hold the system accountable. This was no longer about a meal. It was about breaking a culture of silence and bias that had long been tolerated. As Morgan leaned back into her leather seat, eyes steady and unwavering, she became the eye of a storm poised to change everything. Morgan's fingers hovered momentarily over the sleek touchscreen of her phone before she tapped swiftly, sending an encrypted message to Aaliyah Grant, her executive assistant and trusted ally in every battle. Aaliyah's sharp mind and mastery of Morgan Tech's cutting-edge behavioral recognition system made her the perfect weapon against the silent biases festering within Stratus Air's service culture. Within moments, a flood of data streamed back, a digital dossier revealing the dark undercurrents behind the polished veneer of first-class hospitality. Becky Whitmore's profile flashed on the screen. Senior cabin crew, but beneath the surface lay a troubling trail. Passenger complaints dating back years, subtle patterns of discrimination toward non-white customers, and internal emails dripping with coded prejudice and excuses disguised as policy. Aaliyah's system, designed to detect bias through tone, response delays, and facial expression analysis, flagged an alarmingly high interaction bias index, 87.4%, repeated on 15 different flights over 3 years. The evidence was airtight. Morgan watched the unfolding digital narrative with cold precision. This wasn't an isolated incident, but a symptom of a systemic flaw, a culture that had allowed someone like Becky to ascend unchecked. Aaliyah's fingers danced across the keyboard, compiling a comprehensive report, cross-referencing flight logs, customer feedback, and cabin crew records. The message was clear and unambiguous. Systemic discriminatory behavior detected, immediate organizational culture investigation required. She forwarded the dossier to the highest levels, Stratus Air's command review inbox, legal advisors, and CEO Charles Edmonds himself, a man who respected Morgan and understood the weight of her actions. Morgan didn't need to be present. Her influence was already in motion, rippling through corporate servers thousands of miles away. She closed her phone, eyes narrowing not with triumph but steely resolve. The silent dismissal in seat 1A was about to become a public reckoning. The storm she had quietly summoned would force a confrontation not just with one flight attendant, but with the very systems that had long tolerated subtle yet corrosive discrimination. And Morgan Carter was ready to see it through to the end. Before the plane began its descent, Morgan summoned Daniel Clean, the attendant whose polished demeanor barely concealed the unease flickering in his eyes. "Mr. Clean," she said softly, yet every word carried the weight of steel. "I'd like to ask again about the pre-ordered meal." Daniel straightened, tray in hand, caught off guard by the quiet intensity radiating from seat 1A. Morgan's gaze never wavered as she pressed on. "I heard Miss Thard Whitmore mention prioritizing passengers. What exactly does that mean?" A bead of sweat formed on Daniel's temple, betraying the cool facade. The cabin, filled with muted conversations and clinking glasses, seemed to fade, leaving only the sharp tension between them. He shuffled uncomfortably, searching for an escape, but knew this was no ordinary inquiry. "I think it was a communication misunderstanding," he stammered. "We don't have a policy of discrimination. We consider order timing and availability." Morgan's eyes sliced through his deflection. "I'm a Diamond Plus member, ordered my meal 7 days ago, with email confirmation. I'm the only one here without a premium meal, yet Miss Whitmore speaks of prioritizing guests. If this isn't discrimination, then what is it?" Silence hung thick in the air. Daniel's mouth opened, closed, and he finally lowered his head, stepping back like a fox retreating from the spotlight. Morgan's lips curved into a subtle, slicing smile. No answer was necessary. The truth hung between them, undeniable. Her smartwatch vibrated softly, a confirmation from Aaliyah that the investigation order had been approved by Stratus Air's CEO, and HR and legal teams were mobilizing for immediate evaluation upon landing. The cabin's gentle hum resumed, but the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. Behind her, Becky Whitmore continued her rounds, unaware that her every move was being recorded and scrutinized by an AI system linked to cabin cameras. Evidence mounting quietly but decisively. Morgan leaned back, eyes fixed ahead, her mind a steel trap of calm determination. The silent war had escalated, and with each passing moment, the system that once ignored her was being forced to reckon with its own reflection. This was no longer a question of service, it was a reckoning of justice. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the gate, Morgan Carter rose from her seat with the steady grace of someone who knew the battle was far from over. The cabin buzzed softly with passengers gathering their belongings, chatting casually, oblivious to the seismic shift unfolding in their midst. Awaiting Morgan at the exit were two figures clad in dark suits: Brandon Ellis, Stratus Air's regional CEO for Europe, and a sharp-eyed legal representative from the Geneva division. They bowed slightly in acknowledgement as she passed, their faces betraying a mix of respect and apprehension. "Welcome, Miss Carter," Brandon murmured, but Morgan's gaze barely touched them. "No need to apologize," she replied coolly, her voice carrying the weight of a promise. "This is just the beginning." Behind her, the crew disembarked through the rear exit as usual, Becky Whitmore leading with her customary poised smile, unaware that her routine was unraveling. At the end of the corridor stood a line of stern-faced officials from Stratus's internal security and emergency investigation teams, their presence as chilling as a courtroom summons. Becky's confident stride faltered the moment she saw them, eyes darting for answers that weren't coming. Daniel Clean, too, stood silent, the gravity of the moment settling like a heavy fog over the group. Morgan moved past, her every step marking the turning point of a reckoning years in the making. Shortly after arrival in Geneva, Aaliyah's message came through. Becky had been suspended, and formal testimonies were being gathered. No fanfare accompanied this news, just the cold, efficient machinery of corporate justice engaged. At the luxury hotel overlooking Lake Lemon, Morgan sat alone, a cup of herbal tea steaming beside her, eyes fixed on the placid water, reflecting a sky as calm as her resolve. She understood this was more than personal vindication. It was a watershed moment, forcing an entire industry to confront uncomfortable truths. As the ripple of change spread from seat 1A, the quiet power of one woman's steadfast dignity promised to reshape the future, not just for herself, but for countless others who dared to demand respect where it had long been denied. Morgan Carter stepped into the grand conference room in Geneva, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and unspoken tension. The glow from the massive windows cast long shadows across the polished floor, mirroring the weight of the moment. Today, she wasn't just a passenger or a CEO. She was the catalyst for a reckoning that would shake an entire industry. As dozens of reporters, executives, and influencers filled the room, all eyes turned to her, not because she sought the spotlight, but because her quiet defiance had commanded it. Standing tall in an ivory white suit, unadorned except for a small black bird shaped pin on her collar, symbolizing the Seat 1A coalition, Morgan's voice cut through the murmur like a sharpened blade. She spoke not with anger or accusation, but with measured clarity and unwavering conviction. I am not here to be angry, she began, nor to play the victim. I am here because there are people sitting in seat 34F or in the seats near the lavatories who are deemed unworthy of attention simply because of their skin color, their accent, or the way they call for wine. Her gaze fixed on the Stratus Air representatives, holding them accountable without uttering a single name. She recounted the invisible wounds inflicted by selective recognition, the memorized names of a few privileged white passengers while others were reduced to guest, the feeling of being seen but never truly acknowledged. As the room absorbed her words, the lights shifted softly from cold white to a warm yellow glow, a subtle yet profound signal of change. No further words were needed. In the days that followed, sweeping reforms transformed Stratus Air's first-class service culture. Mandatory unconscious bias training for all cabin crew, the creation of direct feedback channels for VIP passengers, and an unprecedented invitation for Morgan to serve as a strategic advisor shaping the future of luxury service. Morgan never sought accolades or headlines, but her actions became a beacon, a reminder that true power lies not in shouting, but in the precise, timely actions that demand the world's attention. And from that moment on, the simple phrase Seat 1A would forever symbolize not just privilege, but the relentless pursuit of respect and justice for all.